Hi and welcome. I'm Steve Martorano and this is the Behavioral Corner. You're invited to hang with us as we discuss the ways we live today, the choices we make, the things we do, and how they affect our health and well-being. So you're on the corner, the Behavioral Corner. Please hang around a while. Hello, everybody, and welcome again to the Behavioral Corner. My name is Steve Martorano, right where you left me, hanging here on the corner. Real quick, for those of you who might not understand the conceit here, we think if you stay in one place long enough, all the interesting people in the world will wind up crossing your path. And so that's what we're dedicated to doing on the corner. We try to run into interesting people. We know they have lots of great information for us, and that's certainly the case today. So that's the Behavioral Corner. It's a podcast about everything, as a matter of fact, that affects our physical, psychological, emotional, spiritual well-being. We're going to take a look at a topic that has been foremost in our mind here for a very long time, because we first heard about harm reduction a very long time ago. And I'll tell you the context of that in a second. But to shed a lot of light on this topic, we welcome to the corner our guest, Maia Szalavitz. Maia is a journalist, and she is a New York Times bestselling author. Her book, which brings her to us today, her latest book is entitled Undoing Drugs, The Untold Story of Harm Reduction and the Future of Addiction. Maia, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks for writing the book. It's absolutely timely and absolutely necessary that people understand this. Okay, let's begin with the definition of terms here. We'll start at the very beginning. Harm reduction is a term that is so clearly beneficial that one wonders how it has become the source of controversy when it is associated with the issue of substance abuse. I mean, as you point out in your book, as a society, we go to great lengths to reduce harm across all kinds of activities, from seatbelts in cars to helmets in football, although one wonders whether that's enough harm reduction in football. But anyway, do no harm goes to the essence of the Hippocratic Oath, which is first, do no harm. Nevertheless, when people started to talk about harm reduction, and we'll find out about when that started, it automatically pushed lots of strange buttons. So let's begin at the beginning. Where did harm reduction begin, and how did it get to be so controversial?
Sure. So in drug policy, harm reduction is the idea that we should try to stop people from getting hurt rather than try to stop them from getting high. And that is enormously controversial because the war on drugs has as its goal to induce harm in drug users so that they will supposedly realize that they have a problem and quit. And so if you reduce the harm, the fear is that they would never quit and they'll just be having so much fun being addicted that it will make the drug problem much worse. The reality, of course, is that addiction is defined as compulsive drug use that continues in the face of negative consequences. So if negative consequences were going to fix it, by definition, it wouldn't exist. And yet we have this whole apparatus of enforcing the idea that if we can just make the consequences bad enough and make people hit bottom and be tough to them, we will solve this problem. And so anything that gets in the way of being tough and being cruel and making everything as bad as possible for people who use drugs, as an example for kids, so this is why you shouldn't do them, that is why harm reduction is controversial, because it's saying that the drug war idea is fundamentally flawed.
Yes, it's the antithesis of just say no.
Exactly. And it's really saying that, just as with any other medical condition, the way to help is to treat people with dignity and respect and empathy, and not try to grind them into the ground because you think you know what's better for them.
There's some fascinating reasons why that's the case. We probably won't have time to go into, but as you know, substance abuse and the treatment of substance abuse grew up outside of the medical establishment. It was never really a medicine. It was never really a therapeutic field. It was, in fact, a spiritual goal. Put your faith in God. God will deliver you from this plague. But that has some bearing on the way it has been approached. And when you talk about war on drugs being set up to make it more difficult for people to get help, I wonder whether that means you don't accept the idea that they are suffering from a disease. Maybe I'm wrong about this. Do you believe that addiction is a brain disease?
Okay, so it depends on what you mean by brain disease. If you mean by brain disease Alzheimer's or a progressive neurological damage, then no, it is not. The research is pretty clear that what addiction is a learning disorder. And what that means is, in order to get addicted, you have to learn that the drug fixes something for you. And then that has to become ingrained in your behavior in a similar way to how people fall in love or get preoccupied, quite rightly, with their new baby.
Well, again, we can go off on all kinds of tangents here. That's a fascinating take on this now.
And that was my last.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's, it's interesting. I mean, if it's a learned behavior, then it can be unlearned.
Well, exactly. And also what I think is that, there's a very specific type of emotional learning that happens when you fall in love or have a child. And it just resets your whole priorities towards making sure that you sustain those relationships and, keep the kid alive and healthy and all that. So, when that object gets replaced by a drug, then what you're doing, it's just like if you think about people who have affairs, they're like hiding it, they're lying about it. It's not very different from that. Like, people will rob things because they're in love. Like, it's the same kind of thing, but we've just made it super alien.
Yeah, it rearranges the priorities and directs them in an unhealthy way.
Exactly.
All the priorities are directed towards staying high and damn the consequences, which is...
Well, and I mean, the thing about that is that people who are addicted have a reason to be addicted generally. So it's not like you're happily going along your life and you just get exposed to this thing and you just give up everything to become selfish and evil. What generally happens is you've either been traumatized as a child, you have a mental illness, or you have just severe despair, or you may have all three. Then you come across something that actually makes life feel bearable. And yeah, you're going to fall in love with that. And then it's going to be trouble because it will start to interfere with the rest of your life.
Yeah. And I know you tell that story beautifully in another of your books, the Unbroken Brain, or the Unbroken Brain.
Yes.
And I'll tell you, I should have mentioned this at the beginning. You got my attention with the essay in the New York Times from a few weeks back, which had the brilliant headline in terms of attention getting about loving opioids are like love.
Yeah. And I mean, I think I'm kind of amazed that more of the public doesn't understand that, because it's like fundamental physiology. And when you look at it, like if you block brain opioids, like bonding does not happen in other species. And we presume that it's similar in humans, but we fortunately don't usually do that.
Yeah, well, I mean, yes, it is another of the great mysteries of this situation, and that is, and I just lost where I was going with this, but I mean, in terms of why people get high, okay? Simply put, I've interviewed so many people now who've gone through horrors and come out the other side, and almost to a person, when asked, why did you begin getting high? Beyond what you said about trauma, because there's always a lot of that, they said they liked it.
Well, I mean, the thing is, you're not
they enjoyed being high, right? Right.
You're not going to get addicted if you don't like it. And I mean, one of the things that most people don't know and that I wasn't able to mention in the New York Times essay is only about 1/3 of people who get exposed to opioids feel that sense of love and comfort and warmth, and euphoria associated with that. The other 2/3, either it's kind of like an experience, or it's actively aversive. So they're nauseous, they're numb, they just don't like it at all. Now, even among the third that like it, at least half of them, often more than half, don't become addicted. And that tends to have to do with the fact of they have a life that's worth, a life that they don't want to give up in service to this drug.
Yeah.
So,
Do you also think some people just are not predisposed genetically to that kind of behavior?
How would a genetic predisposition work? It has to work by either making you like the drug or by making you unhappy. So it's like, I think we think these genes are these kind of magical things that just do things, but the reality is that they have to act through a specific mechanism. Right. And one mechanism by which they act is, do you like this stuff or not?
Yes.
And the other mechanism is, are you traumatized? And has that affected your physiology such that you feel this experience?
Yeah, genes, I didn't mean to imply that genes are destiny, but they are a factor. They could be a factor.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, and they so it's probably about half and half, like how addiction, just like any other complex behavioral trait, whether it's intelligence or whatever, it's usually around 50%. And so it's like, okay, we've got that 50%. And this is why addiction is so complicated, because it's like the thing that predisposes me to addiction, which for me was like depression that was kind of brought on by being sort of incredibly lonely and outcast due to, as I find out, on being on the autism spectrum. Somebody else may get addicted because they're seriously impulsive and they're not anxious, which I am. They are like bold and they want to do everything and they're not scared.
They're risk takers.
Right. And it's kind of, I'm scared to drive, but I shot heroin. So,
I'm sure you're aware of a terrific book that has been written recently where they make, and it seems odd to think about this, a correlation between the attitudes and behavior of big wave surfers.
Oh yeah.
And drug addicts. And
well, yeah, of course. But it's like, would I ever be a big wave surfer? It's funny. I just spent hours watching them when I was on a plane, and I love the ocean. I love the waves. I do not like getting wiped out even by a small wave. So no, that is just not going to be my thing. But I understand. And I think that when we look at people who are prone to addiction, we have to see that there's very different traits that can get them there. So it might be one person who's super bold and seeking stimulation. The other person may be retreating from stimulation. And some people have extremes on both ends. So, they kind of swing back and forth. But I think it's really important to recognize that there is no one addictive personality.
Yeah.
There is a whole slew of them.
Yeah. Well, Maia Szalavitz is our guest. She is the author of a brand new book called Undoing Drugs, The Untold Story of Harm Reduction and the Future of Addiction, which is troubling to think about. Addiction has a past, and apparently it's going to have a future too. But anyway, we've got this very complicated event. People who abuse drugs and are caught in that vice. We're learning more and more about how to treat that going forward. So let's pivot now to exactly what you're talking about. So this is complicated thing that we're really not very good at understanding, much less treating. And instead of continuing to hammer away at the silver bullet that will make it go away, we've got to stop the harm. And the harm, incidentally, cannot be exaggerated. Just 100,000 people now dead in the past couple of years, more than auto accidents and heart disease. It's a slaughter out there. So tell us about harm reduction, its origins briefly. I know it's a long story, but it began in the home of the Beatles, right?
Exactly. The idea of harm reduction has been floating around for a long time, going back to Hippocrates, as you say. I do not want to call him a hypocrite.
No.
But anyway, that old doctor dude. And in Amsterdam, their drug policy had been sort of based on that, What Liverpool did, however, was they took the idea of harm reduction and they made it into a political movement and a movement within public health, that our goal really has to be to reduce harm. And that if we're trying to harm people in order to help them, that's not really a good idea. Like, whenever we try to do that, we've had terrible bad side effects, and oftentimes you end up making people worse. So what this does, what harm reduction does, and why it has been so scary to prohibitionists and supporters of the drug war, is that it says policies should be making things better, not worse for anybody. The idea of a policy that is focused on like making someone's lives miserable in order to convince some children not to do it, this is using people as instruments. This is like not okay. And the prohibitionists have taken the moral high ground for so long, saying, oh, what about the children? You know, that like, if we, you know, we have to be cruel to people who use drugs so that like children won't take after them. Well, first of all, if I'm dying in a corner somewhere, no kid is going to see it, hopefully. And second of all, shouldn't we be teaching our children that we should be compassionate for people who are ill? And shouldn't we be teaching our children that we want to make life better for people, not worse, and that disabling people should not be our goal? Enabling people to have a productive and happy life as much as possible, that's what harm reduction is about. And we don't want to disable people with tough love or jails or any of that. We want to minimize the harm that is done to them and to people around them. And by doing so, help them actually move towards recovery. And this is the thing that a lot of people really don't get. A lot of people recover because they have hope, not because they have more despair.
And they recover because they're still alive.
Well, exactly. If you're dead, you can't recover. And that's one of the fundamental slogans of harm reduction. And, you know, what's interesting is if you do the most enabling thing in the world, prescribe heroin. Okay, they got the heroin. Like, they don't have to chase it anymore. You know, they don't need money. They got the drug. It's all good, right? Well, if you actually do that, people think, oh, it'll extend the addiction. They'll never get well. They'll just like, you know, go along in a haze. In reality, what happens is, when you take away the cops and robbers and all the chasing of the drugs and the money, people have a lot of time. And suddenly they're like, okay, maybe I should get a job. Maybe I should like, you know, see my family more. Also, there's this phenomenon that happens. If you get what you really, really want and you think is going to fix your life, it usually doesn't. And there's a sense of like, you know, like you get this big success and it's like, everything's going to be solved now. Everybody will love me. It's all going to be good. And then it's like, no, you're still you and you still have all your problems. So that's a similar thing that happens when people who use drugs get all the drugs they want. And so when you allow, you know, once you can sort of open up that space where they say, okay, like more did not solve this, then you can start to see, okay, well, you know, what is behind this? Why are you doing this? And the other thing that's essential to harm reduction is treating people kindly. And, you know, people who are actively using, people will, you know, cross the street to avoid them. People will just, you know, say terrible things about them and to them. People will even commit violence against them. It's a very acceptable prejudice. And so when somebody says, hey, I think you deserve to live, whether you continue using or not, I'm not going to demand abstinence from you in order to think you deserve to live. I'm going to say, you're a human being. All of us have gifts. Please be able to use yours.
Yeah. And to put a fine point on this, there's nothing mutually exclusive about harm reduction and getting clean, ultimately getting clean. In fact, you refer to it, and others have, as using empathy, which has been lacking, and radicalizing it, make it the horse rather than, you know, the cart, and get out in front of this from a human standpoint. But let me ask you, because people say, here's the nub of this thing, as you just said. Wait a minute, you're enabling them. You're making it easier for them to do that. And you don't deny that. You're making it safer, not so much easier, but safer.
Right.
But what happens is when they go, well, I can sort of intellectually appreciate that notion. Where are you going to put the clean needle exchange?
Well, right. And I mean,
at the end of my block, right?
Well, you know, ideally, you just go to a pharmacy like anybody else. And we wouldn't have to like segregate out the people with it. And in fact, in many states, it is legal to just go buy a syringe, and some places you can get them cheap enough that that is a viable way of doing it. And similarly, with safe injection sites and all of that kind of thing. The thing about locating these programs is, first of all, realizing that something like a safe injection site where people can inject under medical supervision, they will not work if they're not in an area where there is already intensive public drug use. Because people are not going to drive several miles to go to the safe injection site. It's got to be in the neighborhood where they already are. So the question is not, should we cite this in this neighborhood? The question is, do you want people shooting up in the street, or do you want them shooting up in the safer place where they have a better chance of getting recovery? Like studies show that like people who attend needle exchange, and basically safe injection sites are a needle exchange with a place to use the needles at, 5 times more likely to get into treatment.
Well, that's a great. I want to pause there because I've heard. I had this explained to me once very, very clearly by a former user who said, "These people." He acknowledged, look, this is about harm reduction. People don't understand; they're just trying to keep the deaths down. He said, but the truth of the matter is, when I was using, I wasn't looking for a safe place to shoot up. I was just looking to score and get high. He said, It's
actually much more pleasant to get high in a safe injection site than it is to have to be looking over your shoulder. Is somebody going to rip me off? Is somebody going to like punch me? Are the police going to come and arrest me? And also to be fair, most of the people who are going to use a safe injection site are people, without houses.
Yeah, yes, of course, right. But anyway, my point was that, and I want you to answer this so that people might understand it. You have people engaged, as we've just described, in incredibly self-destructive behavior. And now a technique comes along that says, we're here to make this safer for you. Why would that might not automatically appeal to someone already engaged in horrible behavior and can't see any other way than this? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
People go to these sites. People like these sites. So, the thing is that, like, yes, there are people that are so severely self-destructive that they won't take any actions to protect themselves, and they are probably actively suicidal, if not consciously so. Interventions for people in that state are going to be different than from people who are just kind of seeking anesthesia. For people who are seeking anesthesia, where you just want to escape, it's so much nicer to be in a warm room with people who care about you, where you can just nod out and do your thing, than it is to be on the street and be exposed. It's kind of like, do people want to have sex on the street? No. I mean, there's a kink perhaps, and I'm not saying anything regarding that, but the vast majority of people prefer to have sex in private. Similarly with injection, you really like doing it in public has the chance of ruining your high.
Mm-hmm. Yes, harshing your mellow. Listen, Maya, I wonder if I'm just talking about some policy prescriptions here that might work, because again, people resist this notion of harm reduction because they think it will continue the use. You have a permanently stoned population. So you've made a clear case for no. This is a path to recovery. Harm reduction is a path to recovery. Would it be a wise policy to say, let's use the most extreme example, that it were legal to get a prescription for heroin?
Yeah, I mean, I think like.
But wait, my further point is, would a wiser policy be yes, for a certain amount of time during which you have to taper off? No, you're not for that. No condition.
First of all, we have 2 medications that are proven to cut the death rate from opioid addiction by 50% or more. These are buprenorphine and methadone. They are both opioids themselves, so presumably heroin would have the same effect, but it only works if you continue taking it. It doesn't have a protective effect once you stop. So in order to get that 50% reduction, which is an enormous, enormous savings of life, and if we had cancer drugs like this, we'd be dancing in the street. In order to get that, you have to stay on. So the other thing is that dealers don't require you to meet all, you just have to pay. You don't have to like jump through all these hoops and piss in a cup or like get it for only X amount of time. That is a recipe for failure. We have tried that over and over again and we're still trying it in the methadone and buprenorphine system, just get people off as fast as possible. Well, no, what you're doing is creating a cycle where people are just cycling in and out of treatment that way. What you want to do is stabilize people. And yeah, some of them are going to continue to use on top and take other drugs aside from what's prescribed to them, but they still have a dramatically lower chance of dying. And where there is life, there is hope. So the idea—
Oh, wait, let me stop you. Let me stop you though. Hope for what?
Hope for getting healthier, getting happier, getting more productive, getting to be more there for your family. Because the thing that also people fail to understand about being on long-term use of opioids is that if you are not using additional drugs and you are at a stable dose and you're taking that dose at the same time every day, I could be right at this minute on a dose of heroin that would kill you. And you wouldn't be able to tell it from my behavior because you get a complete tolerance to the high. Now, maybe I'm getting some like social warmth that, my body wasn't producing enough endorphins or whatever it is, but I am here, I am present, I am able to do anything that anybody else can do. And this is not the case for, say, alcohol maintenance. Like alcohol maintenance can work in some instances, but people remain impaired. Whereas with opioids, you are not impaired if you are on the correct dose and you are taking it the correct way.
So you can be a high functioning person who is—
No, I mean, but it's just like, I'm a high functioning person on Prozac. Does this make me any lesser than anybody else? No. So I'm a high functioning person on methadone. Does that? No. It's like there are many paths to recovery. And one of them is staying on medications, whether they're psychiatric medications or opioids or whatever. But it's just like, if you only define recovery as abstinence, and I've heard in meetings, it said sometimes, if I didn't drink today, it's a good day. It doesn't matter if I beat my wife, doesn't matter if I stomped on the cat, I'm sober, so it's all good. No, that is really not okay, actually, especially for the wife and the cat, but also because what people really want from recovery is quality of life. Is, Freud said, we want to be able to love and work. So let's see, how can we best do that? And for some of us, the best way to do that, in my instance, is to stay on antidepressants, because when I'm not on them, I am clingy and needy and anxious and miserable. So, again, for some people, that drug might be an opioid, but I'm not going to judge anybody based on the fact that their wiring is such that they need some chemical support.
Yeah, and Freud said that thing about love and work, and he was, high on cocaine most of the time. So yes, he certainly could function real well. Let me ask you.
And by the way, I'm not a big fan of him in general.
Of course you're not. No one is anymore, are they? Anyway, I'm really like pushing back here because I'm going to try to be the guy in the street here on the behavioral corner. And that guy is saying, great, you'll just have an army of people who are on drugs, and how is that good? Aren't we supposed to, and we understand about happiness and all that, but aren't we supposed to be moving towards some sobriety?
Why?
So,
Why?
Let me ask you. You had a very serious substance abuse problem.
Yes.
How bad did it get? I mean, at the end, what were you?
Yeah, I was shooting up like 40 times a day. I was doing cocaine and heroin. I was really, really sick. For me, as it turned out, I needed abstinence plus antidepressants. And whatever the case is, that like I got there by luck. And despite the fact that, I had legal issues. I had all kinds of things. I was thrown out of school. The idea that, sort of putting me in jail would have fixed that. It wouldn't. It would have just made it worse, because then I'd come out with so the thing here is that, like, what do we really care about? The chemicals in my bloodstream, or am I a happy, productive, functional, loving person?
Well, I'll tell you right now, I'm interested in that last part, okay? But I'm interested at how you got there. The moment you're not using heroin anymore, right?
No.
Okay. No. So at some point you were able, you say it's luck. I get that. We want to expand that opportunity for many other people, for them to arrive at the same point you did, where you went.
What happened is somebody taught me to use bleach to clean my needles, so I did not get infected with HIV. And 50% of the people that I would have been sharing with were already positive, including the guy I was about to share a needle with when I was taught to protect myself. So first of all, that bit of harm reduction most likely saved my life. It also sort of started a political passion in me, because I was like, why do people just want to let us die? Like, gay men are out there fighting for their lives. Like, why are we just not getting this information out to people? And why are politicians saying, no, we can't give them that information because that'll encourage the kids to shoot up? And it's like, really? I don't think anybody looking at me is going to want to be like me at that point. So, it was just ridiculous. I think that, I'm not saying that nobody ever needs abstinence. What I am saying is that what we should care about is not whether the person is abstinent, but whether the person is happy and loving and productive and able to, be the best person they can be for themselves.
And find their path, find their way to sobriety, exactly. if that's what they want. By the way, it's a chilling story. Maia tells in her book about that moment when the complete stranger says, don't use that needle, you'll get sick. That's amazing. Let me ask you here, then we're going to wrap up here because I know you're probably busy. Our guest, Maia Szalavitz, author of the book Undoing Drugs, The Untold Story of Harm Reduction and the Future of Addiction. Is there I don't know the answer to this, and I'll let you answer it. The relationship between harm reduction, getting some traction, and the shift from criminalizing this behavior to addressing it as a health issue coincided with race, did it not? There was a time where we know people were doing all the bad stuff you said and dying in proportionately same kinds of numbers, but those neighborhoods were unseen. They were people who were brown and black, and let them die.
This is my whole work here. Our drug policy is not based on these drugs are more dangerous, so they're illegal. Our policy is based on these drugs are used by people, or we associate them with people who we have prejudices against, and therefore they should be illegal, but the drugs we like are fine, even if they're more dangerous. For example, tobacco is way more dangerous than marijuana. You cannot have a scientific risk-based assessment that says, yeah, we should have tobacco legal and marijuana illegal. So our whole drug war has really been about racism and about using the idea of drugs to target certain groups of people. Because frankly, if jail was such a great way of stopping addiction, why don't we put the billionaire addicted people in there? Why is it like that we only do it, why do the white people get off?
Or at least the billionaire people who are profiting from this.
I don't even care. It just, the thing for me really is just that, no, we don't send rich people to jail for drug possession because we recognize that treatment is a way to treat a health condition. And we, if jail and mass incarceration was such a good, technique for stopping addiction, we should have seen it by now. We've gone from spending a few million a year on it to over $1 trillion. Not trillion per year, but multi-billions per year, and collectively $1 trillion. This does not work.
Yeah, it's undeniable. It's undeniable, though, that looking at just the recent epidemic at opioid use, once it's spilled over into white neighborhoods, and I don't mean just the poor Appalachian areas. I'm talking about the Gold Coast suburbs of American cities. Once it's spilled into there, suddenly everybody, oh, wait, these people are sick. These people need help. We can't be locking them up.
Well, and this is why, like, people will say, like, how come you're for this? Okay, I've been for this since 1986 when we were cracking down on crack and locking up tons of Black people. So we're still doing badly on all of that. But I am not saying, there's no way you can say, oh, well, she's supporting it because she's white. I'm supporting it because I've seen the injustice to people of color, because I did not go to prison when I would have, faced it into life. And so I feel very passionately that, the answer isn't, well, now let's crack down on white people and do the same terrible things we've done to Black people. Exactly. If I was a Black person, I might feel like that because, I rightfully would be very pissed. But I think that, what we need is harm reduction for everybody.
And again, we're fully back to the beginning of this, where you talk about this is a very old and natural attitude among people, that you help someone who is in crisis. You don't kick them when they're down, you pick them up. And by whatever means we are getting that point more fully now, good for all of us.
Well, exactly. And, I think, it's sad that we needed white people getting sick for us to get to understand why this is essential. Yeah. But those of us who have been fighting for it since way back, sort of recognize that, it's always been essential.
Yeah, incidentally, just as one last point about the politicization of drug policy. Yes, it was targeted because it was a drug of minorities. These were behaviors of minorities. But when the student movement rose up in reaction to both civil rights and the war in Vietnam, it's pretty clear that the Nixon administration's policy, he's the one that launched the war on drugs, said, hey, here's a chance to target our regular victims, the people of color, and all these damn kids that are doing and all those drugs became classified as Schedule I narcotics, and the war went on and on. Well, it's time to not so much call an end to the war on drugs, but to change our tactics. I think that's what you're trying to say. I think this is a valuable book.
Get rid of it, because the war on drugs is really a war on people. I think what we want to do, what we need, is to reduce harm, and to, by doing that, there's many ways of helping people feel better so that they don't end up becoming addicted. We need to do things in terms of prevention that we don't do, such as making the world a better place for the people on the bottom. We could do an extraordinary amount of prevention by reducing child trauma and by working with kids who are traumatized before they start self-medicating. And by also identifying mental illness early before it becomes a disaster. I was pre-depressive for a very long time and ruminating on how horrible I was. If I had been able to sort of have cognitive skills to deal with that, I might not have ever had the problems that I ended up having, because they were so directly related to self-medicating the self-hatred.
It's the tragedy, the additional tragedy of substance abuse is that the co-occurring problems that are probably at the source of the behavior are not looked at or treated until the problem is manifest. Then they go, oh, there's other things. There's other things going on here.
Right. Well, then we see the drug as the problem. And then we have policies where, like, okay, the drug's the problem. We'll just take this prescription opioids away, and then look, oh, everybody will be fine. Illegal market won't develop. Fentanyl won't happen. It'll be just fine. We just take away the drugs. We don't care if you have pain. We don't care if you have addiction. This will, save the children or something. And what do we end up with but a much, much, much worse situation?
Yeah, slaughter, as a matter of fact. The book is entitled Undoing Drugs, The Untold Story of Harm Reduction and the Future of Addiction. Its author, Maia Szalavitz, has been our guest on this program. Boy, I could, you're invited to come back, once a month if you like. You're terrific. The book's important. Thanks so much for your time. Have a great holiday, and maybe we'll see you sometime in the new year. I hope so.
Cool. All right. Thanks so much. And let me give you one tiny critique. Please don't use the word substance abuse because it implies child abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and it's really stigmatizing. And that's why it got taken out of the DSM in 2013. So misuse is really good. Substance use disorder is cool. But like, you're not abusing a poor little drug. Like, you're abusing yourself, but we call self-abuse a different thing. So that's my little critique. Anyway.
No, thanks for the heads up. Staying ahead of the DSM, as you know, can be challenging. Thanks, yes. Maia. Thanks so much. And again, always welcome to join us on the Behavioral Corner, as are the rest of you. I'll see you on the other side of the holidays, I guess. So have a great Christmas, if that's your inclination. And don't forget to follow us in all those places. And we'd love to get a review or two on, when you get a chance to do that, because we like praise. No, we'll take criticism too as well. Thanks, and see you next time on the Behavioral Corner.
Retreat Behavioral Health has proudly been serving the community for over 10 years. Here at Retreat, we believe in the power of connection and quality care. We offer comprehensive, holistic, and compassionate treatment from industry-leading experts. Call 855-802-6600 or visit us at www.retreatbehavioralhealth.com to begin your journey today.